And I think I'm fortunate to have grown up Generation X, too. We got any Gen Xers in here? Yeah, I don't even care.
It's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care.
Gen X, how did you guys do it? How did you stay out of the generational hate?
Would you really want Gen X to get involved? Because Gen X truly is the last of the FAFO generation.
Anybody else think it's really kind of weird that we never got a Generation X president?
Have you met us? You don't want a Gen X president. You don't want us in charge of jack sh**.
I'm not great at the advice. Can I interest you in a sarcastic comment?
The energy comes out of us, and it goes into the audience, and they bounce it back, and we just play catch with some vibes.
You're Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude.
Who let Gen X off the hook? Why aren't we talking about those guys?
We fought in real life, not on the internet. We are the last generation of feral children. We didn't have safe spaces. We didn't have trigger warnings.
Words don't hurt us. We're not afraid of opinions or different points of view.
We're the middle children of history, man. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression is our lives.
This is a generation whose win-loss record actually meant something.
Gen X may be the last cohort that just says the thing, says what it is, and doesn't worry about whether it feels polite or politically correct or it's hurting somebody's feelings.
We're not so filled with insecurities that we seek validation through groupthink and mob mentality.
Nirvana means freedom from pain and
Suffering in the external world, that's just the Webster's dictionary. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
We mind our own business. We are older than Google. We are not the bigger person. Leave us alone. CBS did a story on all of the generations, and they put up a graphic and completely forgot Gen X. This happened a couple years ago. You didn't hear anything about it.
I'm not even supposed to be here today. I'm not even supposed to be here today. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Don't worry. I don't have low self-esteem. I have low esteem for everyone else.
Artistic integrity. You're not artistic, and you have no integrity.
Mayonnaise brand came on talking about Gen X.
I think we can all agree that if we're generalizing, Gen X is the worst generation.
Okay, if this is happening, if Gen Z is picking a fight with Gen X in the same way that millennials picked fights with boomers, you need to be prepared.
Hey! What? Why are you always so annoying? Why are you so annoying? Because I'm very off-putting, don't say demure. I was gonna say depressed. Why are you like this?
Look, I'm sorry you're a byproduct of helicopter parenting, and that because you never faced adversity, you fly into hysterics over minor issues.
You know, that's just like your opinion, man.
You never believed I said that there were gonna be very...
Our parents, the boomers, were the first to sort of have, divorce became a big thing. We were latchkey kids.
There was almost no visual record of Gen X when they were younger, meaning they could do whatever they wanted and not have to worry ever about a video resurfacing as they got older. You combine that with the fact that most of their parents are older boomers who gave them very little parental supervision, and that is a dangerous combination.
You know, you really need some help, and a regular psychiatrist couldn't even help you.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Part of me thinks it's neglect, and part of me thinks our parents were actually trying to kill us.
What's bizarre? I mean, we're all pretty bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it, that's all.
But you know, the toughest thing is to love somebody who has done something mean to you, especially when that somebody has been yourself.
The Gen X that you're seeing today are the ones that survived. They fear nothing.
And they don't have feelings. They don't care. Don't mess with them. They're in their quiet place. Leave them alone.
It's not your fault. Don't with me, all right? Don't with me, Sean, not you. It's not your fault.
They are not the forgotten generation. They are the in case of emergencies break glass generation.
And I'm so defended that I actively work to make people dislike me so I won't feel bad when they do.
You know, it's really hard to believe everything you read.
I'm 29 years old, damn it. And I want to sit in a comfortable chair and watch television and go to sleep at a reasonable hour.
So why am I calling them old people? They are me, I am them, I am old people. What the hell?
Generation X, my generation, they're 50s. You see the divorce, the bad relationship with the kids, the dreams that didn't work out.
I don't know, I guess there's something wrong with us.
Yeah, I'm glad we can agree.
Is Generation X really built different from other generations? Or is this just talk?
The true losers in the generational war are Generation X.
Generation X felt the economic squeeze, lagging wages, rising housing costs.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate, so we can buy we don't need. We're very, very pissed off.
It's just, I just have noticed this image of us as being a serious, angry, pissed off band.
So tell me what it is that makes us Generation X really so unusual.
One thing that's unusual about Generation X is that no one is really that interested in them.
They are the nuclear option to the nuclear option. Every couple years, everybody's like, oh, we need to get Gen X involved. But somehow they always get talked off the ledge.
People judge you by your expression.
Yes, and I believe there is something intrinsically wrong with that system.
I've become possessed with the idea that Gen X is the best generation.
A recent post on Vogue's website makes the case that the coolest generation is Generation X.
Either you're nihilistic and you're like, well, then I have nothing to live for, or, dude, we're gonna die at any second, so let's go light some on fire.
Fire! Fire!
What if your dope was on fire? Impossible, sir. It's in Johnson's underwear.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Every generation likes to believe it's special, like it arrived at a turning point in history, and that it saw the truth before anyone else did. But there is one generation that never bothered to make that claim. There's one generation that didn't ask to be remembered, and didn't even bother to explain itself. Generation X is the middle child of modern history, the 13th generation of America. They are the variable X we have yet to solve. Born between 1965 to 1980, they were too young to shape the world the boomers built. Now they're too old to inherit the cultural spotlight. They grew up in the shadow of revolutions they did not start, and they came of age just as the promises of progress began to collapse. They grew up realizing the entire system was unreliable. Gen X learned earlier than anybody that adults are clueless. They watched optimism burn out in real time. Instead of trying to save the world, they just learned how to survive inside it. They mastered sarcasm. They distrusted authority. They kept their expectations low but their punchlines ready. And then somehow, they gave birth to the generation that is going to be stuck with trying to fix everything. I was born in the late 90s, and my parents were born in the late 60s. If we want to try understanding Gen Z, we might need to understand Gen X first. How was Gen X formed? How did they adapt? How did they pass on their worldviews? Who are they? After the baby boomers spawned from a massive post-World War II population surge, Gen X emerged during a stark baby bust. Birth rates plummeted to under 2 children per woman starting in the 1960s. The birth control pill was FDA approved in May of 1960, meaning Gen X was the first generation people took pills not to have. Their title captured an ambiguity. Popularized by Douglas Copeland's 1991 novel Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, the X symbolized an unknown variable in society's equation. When solving for the variable X, let's try to figure out the big picture first. How does this generation fit into human history? How would we pinpoint its archetype? The Strauss-Howe generational theory is popular, even though it is more symbolic than scientific. It suggests that American history moves in recurring 80 to 100 year cycles. Each cycle contains 4 20-year turnings, which shape distinct generational archetypes: prophet, nomad, hero, and artist. Each archetype's personality is shaped by their formative years. This is like the more polished version of that strong men create good times, weak men create bad times meme. Through the Strauss-Howe generational lens, the 60s and 70s was an awakening era. Anyone born during these decades occupies the nomad archetype. When they were growing up, institutions were being questioned, traditions were being dismantled, and adults were more focused on self-expression than stability. Fittingly, nomads always grow up unprotected, watching society experiment with values in real time, and learning this core lesson early on: nobody is coming to save you. The generation before them, the baby boomers, held the prophet archetype. Boomers were raised to believe they could remake the world through moral conviction, but their children learned to survive skeptically inside a world where conviction often failed and systems would just break. Trusting institutions feels naive when institutions just keep contradicting themselves. Gen X came of age during an unraveling period, defined by decaying faith in government and corporations. Economic security no longer felt guaranteed, and loyalty increasingly looked like a liability. Their parents promised them a social contract: work hard, play by the rules, and get rewarded. However, this contract was fraying. Gen X did not even try to fix the system, they just learned how to move around it. So they became cultural middlemen, fluent in sarcasm and resistant to authority. Their energy is gritty and unsentimental.
What does assassination mean?
I've been terribly concerned about the graphic display of violence which the mass media has been showing recently.
The oldest members of Gen X were born into the aftershock of political trauma. The assassination of Bobby Kennedy in 1968 marked this moment where hope began to feel disposable. There was a historical series of formative shocks that chipped away at this idea of eternal progress. The 1970s were filled with stagflation, oil crises, and rising crime. The Challenger explosion in 1986 was a televised failure on a national scale, shattering the myth that science and institutions were steadily guiding humanity upward. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 ended the Cold War narrative they had grown up with, but it also revealed how quickly supposedly permanent systems could dissolve. The crack epidemic tore through American cities, exposing how selectively society applied concern and resources. And if all that wasn't enough, the AIDS crisis introduced yet another pervasive fear about human connection, just as this generation was entering adulthood. The Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher era really cemented this message that individuals were on their own. Deregulation and privatization reframed success as a personal achievement and failure as a personal flaw. Collective solutions were treated with suspicion, and safety nets were gradually removed. So you better learn how to take care of yourself without asking permission. All this disgruntled confusion translated into this weird aesthetic of aggressive indifference. Grunge music was something new. Its sound was angry, but not like too angry. You don't want people thinking you care too much. The music was raw, almost an exaggeration of itself. It represented a generation that didn't trust anything that tried too hard to impress. Bands like Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Stone Temple Pilots became huge. But the biggest band of the time was Nirvana, and this may have been symbolic. In the Eastern philosophies, nirvana is defined as the ultimate state of liberation from suffering in samsara. It represents an individual's passions being completely extinguished. I'd rather be dead than cool. Kurt Cobain. Films like Reality Bites captured the post-recession hangover of young adults who had done what they were told and still ended up drifting. The movie was self-aware and disillusioned with the idea that corporate life would deliver meaning. There were a lot of movies like this. We've all seen that circulating meme pointing out how every Gen X movie was like, I have a stable job with benefits, I'm going insane. Was Gen X really like this? There are a few fictional characters that represent the mascots of this generation. The first is Chandler Bing from the sitcom Friends. Chandler represents deflection. The world does not reward sincerity, so jokes become a way to stay emotionally agile. As much as this generation watched Friends, they absolutely hate being compared to Friends, which is pretty much the most Gen X thing ever. Another notorious mascot of theirs is Daria Morgendorffer. Daria first appeared as a recurring character on the series Beavis and Butthead before becoming her own spin-off. Both shows are seen as key cultural representations of Gen X. Beavis and Butthead directly embody media saturation and lack of ambition. Meanwhile, Daria represented a flip side, a cynical, misunderstood intellectual who critically observed the surrounding absurdity, all while struggling to find her own place in a world she felt disconnected from. She was unimpressed by authority and allergic to enthusiasm. Both of these shows captured a specific slacker ethos and disaffection that resonated strongly with the generational experience of the late 1980s and early 90s. For Gen X, being a slacker was an accomplishment, somehow. Ferris Bueller's Day Off was a film about a charismatic teen who faked being sick to have an epic day off in Chicago with his girlfriend and his buddy. Whoa, you mean to tell me he skipped school? What a rebel! Totally radical! But what's this? Old Principal Rooney is trying to hold Ferris accountable and shut down his fun? Gag me with a spoon. You're cramping his style, man. That's bogus. Another iconic slacker is from The Big Lebowski. The dude embodies the generation's defining trait, a preference for abiding through life's absurdities instead of chasing ambition. Even though the dude is technically a burned-out hippie, his passive go-with-the-flow philosophy spiritually feels Gen X, making him resonate with all those apathetic slackers. The entire plot of the movie is just a celebration of simple pleasures. Whoa! You mean to tell me he dresses comfortably? And he doesn't like working? But he does enjoy recreational activities like bowling? And he also likes drinking? Cool, man! And dude, get this. The funniest part? His nickname is literally The Dude. This is a comedic goldmine. A few years back, my dad sat me down to show me The Big Lebowski. He was gassing it up, saying it was one of the greatest works of cinema ever created. After the movie, I remember thinking, well, now that was overhyped. I don't know. I laughed a couple times, but maybe I missed the whole point of the movie. Maybe it was a you just had to be there kind of story. The characters Gen X resonated with all reflect the same instinct of the culture they inherited. Don't reveal too much. Don't trust the script you're handed. Never let the system see you care more than it does. But why is all of this? We can look at the big picture here, but we still need to ask, what actually happened to these people? Gen X was raised primarily by the older baby boomers and the younger silent generation. For simplicity, we'll just refer to all these parents as boomers. Gen X was often described as the latchkey generation. Their childhoods throughout the 70s and 80s marked a pivot away from rigid authoritarian discipline, and a pivot towards something more ambiguous and maybe more damaging: permissive neglect. Parents expected competence without providing emotional scaffolding. Children were trusted with adult responsibilities long before they were given adult understanding. Many learned how to cook, clean, manage schedules, and emotionally regulate themselves, simply because no one else was around to do it for them. Independence was not encouraged. Independence was assumed. Boomers were reacting against the strictness of their own parents, replacing punishment with absence. Career ambition and personal fulfillment took priority, especially as economic pressures pushed households toward dual incomes. After-school hours became unsupervised stretches of time where kids learned how to occupy themselves and stay out of trouble. For Gen X, repressing emotions was rewarded, and neediness was punished through further neglect. Divorce accelerated this. As marriage instability surged, Gen X children were shuffled between households and step-parents, with little emotional processing of the disruption. Kids learned that stability was conditional, and that adults could disappear with minimal explanation. The lesson was that relationships were temporary and unreliable. Maturity was defined by detachment. Why are you expressing emotions? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Children grew up deeply uncomfortable and asking for help. When they struggled, it was interpreted as a personal shortcoming. This ultimately produced adults who valued independence intensely, but carried unresolved wounds around abandonment and emotional safety. We won't ever give a fuck until you give a fuck about me and my generation. Generation X, Generation Strange. Sun don't even shine through our window pane. Limp Bizkit.
Parents wanted to have you, but they didn't want to see you. All the adults could have disappeared from the face of the earth and we wouldn't have cared. All we needed was our friends from the neighborhood, maybe a stray dog or two, a pocket knife, a lighter, a box of Cheez-Its or Pop-Tarts, and a can of soda, and we could survive a long time.
In the parental absence, there was a gap. And that gap was filled by this brand new thing that came out in 1981 called MTV, music television. Allegedly, that's what the M stands for. Early music videos offered escapist worlds that contrasted sharply with the emotional flatness of home life. Music became a companion, and pop culture became a surrogate language for feelings that weren't welcomed in conversation. These artists on MTV could sing about feelings that Gen X had no idea how to put into words. In the 1980s, there were some popular films that reflected young people navigating identity without guidance, and negotiating meaning without mentors. The Goonies presented a world where kids go on a life-threatening adventure with barely a single adult noticing. Despite being a fantasy, it offered an eerily familiar world. In E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the parents are divorced and emotionally unavailable. In fact, you don't even see an adult's face until halfway through the movie. Elliot and his siblings roam freely and manage crises themselves. themselves. Emotional connection is found through, of all things, an alien. The moral of the story is that Gen X children literally connected more to creepy-ass aliens than to adults. The Breakfast Club was a defining film for Gen X. This was a deeply emotional drama. It told the story of 5 high school students, each a vastly different stereotype, all sharing a Saturday detention together. Each of these kids were alienated, cynical, sarcastic, and deeply aware of the arbitrary hierarchies of school and society. The characters are forced to understand one another in the vacuum left by adults. See, it's only when the adults are gone that the kids begin to make some progress with each other. It is a timeless film because, in the end, the rebellious boy ends up with the popular girl, the athletic boy ends up with the weird girl, and the nerd ends up with nobody and gets stuck doing everyone's group assignment himself. What is this, a documentary? Each generation is driven to rage against the one that raised it. Boomers rebelled against their parents in extreme ways. They burned bras, drove across the country, dropped acid, and started cults. Meanwhile, Gen X rebelled against their parents by, I don't know, going to their rooms and smoking weed, I guess. This made everyone wonder, how was Gen X going to handle raising their own children? Now we've entered the 21st century. Gen Z was born between 1997 to 2012. When Gen X began raising Gen Z, they weren't trying to correct history so much as avoid repeating the neglect they experienced. Their parenting style fused engagement with autonomy, built around the belief that kids should feel supported without being managed. Gen X parents showed up to schools, coached teams, helped with homework, and stayed involved in academic decisions, yet resisted the impulse to micromanage every hour of a child's life. Of course, this was not universal, but it was common enough to shape the cohort. After observing the boomer helicopter parents of millennials, Gen X aimed to find more of a balance. In the home, rules existed, but they were usually explained instead of enforced through fear. Mistakes became conversations rather than punishments. Gen X parents wanted kids who could think through consequences because they understood them, not because they were just afraid of punishment. That emphasis on dialogue cultivated empathy and self-awareness, but it also blurred the traditionally familiar power dynamics. Kids were encouraged to speak openly and articulate emotions early, which produced confidence but sometimes weakened clear boundaries. More financial literacy was taught. Early exposure to budgeting and candid discussions about money normalized economic reality instead of mythologizing success. Gen X modeled work without romanticizing it. They talked openly about layoffs and office politics. Gen Z grew up hearing about adult stress narrated in real time. This transparency stripped adulthood of illusion. It made Gen Z practical early, but it also meant they absorbed global instability before they had the emotional insulation to contextualize it. This upbringing shaped their values in visible ways. Raised in households that emphasized fairness, emotional literacy, and skepticism toward authority, a lot of Gen Z developed strong commitments to social progress and intolerance for hypocrisy. Diversity was normalized, and biases were recognized and outright rejected. Gen X's distrust of institutions carried over, mutating into Gen Z's gravitation toward gig work and professional identities that don't rely on long-term loyalty to any single system. Computers, phones, and the internet were introduced as practical instruments for learning. Constant exposure to global crises and social injustice produced elevated anxiety for this new generation. Gen X parents taught emotional awareness, but awareness without protection can turn into hypervigilance. Social media stepped in where guidance thinned out, becoming a primary source of advice and identity formation. Obviously, Gen X did not grow up with social media. This was a language they could not speak because they never experienced it in their developmental years. So this strained parent-child relationships as Gen Z sought autonomy while still craving reassurance through shallow validation on the internet. One of the most extreme consequential shifts was the parent-as-peer dynamic. Gen X parents spoke to their children laterally, sometimes confiding too much too early. This fostered closeness, but occasionally transferred adult weight onto developing minds. Kids learned how the world worked before they were ready to carry that knowledge. Independence arrived early, but so did pressure. A generation emerged that inherited Gen X's cynicism, but softened it with a belief that systems could still be improved if challenged intentionally. Gen Z was skeptical, but without being disengaged. They question everything, but unlike their parents, they still believe participation matters. This produced a generation that knows the world is unstable, yet still feels responsible for changing it. Like millennials, Gen Z is both ambitious and sensitive. Unlike millennials, Gen Z likes to pretend they don't have these characteristics. While Gen X experimented with sarcasm and apathy, Gen Z has responded with irony. Irony is the perfect cultural adaptation to living in a world where every institution feels hollow. Gen Z grew up online, where nothing is sacred and every claim is memed into oblivion. Their humor is layered, way too self-aware, and downright absurd, an evolution of the sarcasm they were raised in. Believe it or not, a few of the older ones actually are biting the bullet and having kids now. Gen Beta will be the group born between 2025 to 2039. Why have we not yet updated this name?
What do you think is the biggest mistakes parents make in raising their children?
Not to remember their own childhood.
Yeah.
As Gen Z begins raising their children, they are predicted to blend their parents' pragmatic skepticism with a more deliberate push for balance and protection. They were influenced by distrust of over-involvement, but shaped by their own experiences of hyper-connected anxiety. A lot of Gen Z parents will continue to experiment with hybrid approaches, more structured boundaries around screens and social media than they had, while still prioritizing emotional openness and adaptability. The newest generation will be deeply tech-immersed, yet selectively shielded from it. Gen Beta will continue to carry forward Gen X's realism, though they are predicted to channel it into proactive problem-solving rather than sideways navigation. At least Gen Z hopes this will be the case. What will Gen X be leaving behind after they're gone? I'm disgusted by my own and my generation's apathy. I'm disgusted at what we allow to go on, by how spineless, lethargic, and guilty we are. Kurt Cobain. Withdrawing in disgust is not the same thing as apathy. Slacker. It's easy to blame the boomers. They were loud, dominant, confident, and they stayed in power long enough for their fingerprints to be everywhere. When the boomer chokehold on power is gone, an uncomfortable question becomes unavoidable. Who gets blamed next? The millennials, who were largely raised by the boomers and inherited a collapsing system they never controlled? Or Gen X, the generation that saw the cracks early, understood the game was rigged, and mostly chose to work around it instead of confronting it head on? What will be the Gen X legacy? It seems uniquely difficult to judge a generation that never once claimed to be saviors. They didn't promise a better world. They didn't wrap themselves in grand narratives about destiny. They were realists. History is often harsher on generations that knew better but stayed quiet than on those who were loudly wrong. Gen X understood institutions were decaying, yet they rarely tried to seize them. They navigated sideways into careers, technology, culture, and personal autonomy. It unfortunately allowed older power structures to linger longer than they should have. Click maintenance, the need of one generation to see the generation following it as deficient, so as to bolster its own collective ego. Kids today do nothing. They're so apathetic. We used to go out and protest. All they do is shop and complain. Douglas Copeland. Each generation has unique online behavior. It's easy to see how cringe the boomers, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha acts on social media, but nobody really critiques how Gen X acts on social media. This may be because Gen X acts so cringe that it's too uncomfortable to even acknowledge. Their posts scream, "I'm a badass, don't test me." They call everyone out like they're still yelling at the cable guy in 1995. They fight in the comment section, ready for anyone to pounce on them, then go swinging like it's a bar fight. They say, "Try me, kid. Nothing can hurt me. I grew up drinking out of the hose." Yeah, nothing screams latchkey survivor like flexing how little you care, while actively proving you care way too much. Around 2020, amid rising generational tensions online, a controversial meme archetype emerged that some tied to Gen X: the Karen. This figure doesn't represent the whole generation, and doesn't represent all Gen X women. Anyone across demographics can exhibit this behavior. The meme gained traction because it captured a certain midlife frustration, deep skepticism toward institutions with intimate knowledge of how to manipulate them for personal gain. Karen became shorthand for cynicism leveraged with entitlement. Again, it's not the defining image of Gen X, but it is the dark shadow of a generation that learned early how to navigate broken systems sideways instead of tearing them down. The positive aspect of this is that this generation may leave an impact on what they prepared others to confront. Every generation creates another, and they raised a generation fluent in emotional language, skeptical of authority, and intolerant of hypocrisy. Gen Z inherited Gen X's BS detector, but not their resignation. Where Gen X disengaged, Gen Z still believes participation might matter. If Gen Z does manage to meaningfully challenge institutions, Gen X will be remembered less as cowards and more as buffers. They're the generation that absorbed disillusionment so their own children could metabolize it into action. History does not celebrate the adapters. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Historically, Gen X will not be remembered as a heroic generation, but it probably won't be remembered as a destructive generation either. It lived between collapsing myths and unfinished futures. Its legacy won't be clean or flattering. It will be uneasy and unresolved, just like them. They didn't teach the world how to believe. They taught it how to see clearly. Whether that clarity becomes condemnation or redemption will be decided by those who come after them. And we have an entire alphabet of variables that we have yet to solve.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.